Chicago Sun-Times newsroom. I'm Natasha Korecki, and this is Off Message, our weekly political talk show. Joining me this week is our watchdog reporter, Chris Fusco, editorial writer Kate Grossman, and Chicago Sun-Times columnist Mark Brown. This week we've had a bit of news going on with Governor Quinn's administration. He's been hit by two different law enforcement agencies that are having different inquiries into different parts of the anti-violence program, which was, of course, Quinn's brainchild. Mark Brown, is this a here we go again situation, or is this not so fast yet?
Well, I don't think we've quite got there yet, even though, Bruce Rauner's out there today saying that Quinn is under investigation and this shows he's corrupt. They haven't shown anything of the sort yet, but this is definitely a troubled program. It was, at the very least, sloppy and badly run, and when you do something like that, they try to throw a whole lot of money out on the street. And this actually goes back to 2010, right? This program was launched right before the 2010 election, and that's why everybody's antenna is up. They try to get a lot of money on the street in a hurry.
Right. Do you think that that's the most damning aspect of this, that it was the timing of when the money was first approved? I mean, the Quinn administration says no money was expended until after the election.
That seems irrelevant. I mean, they got the program running, and then there's always a lag between when you get something started and when there's actually checks in the mail. So, I mean, clearly Quinn, obviously has a long history of wanting to, combat violence, but he clearly wanted to get this program out as quickly as possible in advance of the election. And, there's no question the Auditor General found that it was sloppy and poorly managed, and, hopefully for everyone's benefit, that's all that it is. But there was a clear rush to get this program out, and that means some of the dollars were wasted.
And it's in a program like this being rushed out in the fall. These kind of programs normally, are most effective during the summer months, right? So the timing of it all makes it a little weird in that respect.
What the governor needs to hope for here, though, is that history is not what drives the future. Historically, these programs have been vehicles by which politicians can help supporters, then they come out and support the governor and get him reelected, and then there is grant money that flows and people get jobs and get hired. Our experience, and Mark and I are still writing about cases, I think, that date back to the Blagojevich administration. Grant programs get gamed. It is a historical fact in Illinois. The U.S. Attorney in Springfield is still prosecuting grant fraud cases that go back to the Blagojevich days. And what I see with this one is it could be death by 1,000 cuts for Governor Quinn. Is he going to be the one orchestrating, schemes to steal $10,000 here and $20,000 here? Of course not. But is the potential for those schemes existing? Absolutely. In a $53 million program, $55 million program with this much money going to this many different people, it could be just one drip, 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 drip leading up to November, which is going to be bad news.
And the toughest part for Quinn is that, what Rauner sees in this is where he can go after Quinn's main advantage, which is that he's the stand-up ethical guy. And so, he is all over this, trying to take advantage of the fact that, linking him to Blagojevich, which they're obviously very different guys, but Blagojevich had huge ethical problems, and he wants those two linked, and he wants to say Quinn is not who you all think he is, voters, so vote for me.
Lots of experience investigating Rod Blagojevich. What are some traps that maybe Quinn's administration should try to avoid? Because, of course, Blagojevich, there was a lot of scrutiny, but he ended up getting in trouble for something that happened right before his arrest.
Well, sure. And I mean, the game plan here politically, I think, for both guys is actually quite similar. When it comes to the nursing home business, Rauner is going to claim it wasn't like I was in those nursing homes watching the level of care. We were investors in these companies that overran, and we invest in a lot of things, and things go wrong, and yes, we get sued. With Quinn, it's going to be kind of similar. Hey, we set out with good intentions, $55 million, here you go. We threw it out at a time when violence is at historically high levels in Chicago. How was I supposed to know what these people did? So it's going to be interesting to watch how they go at each other, and they're both going to have the same defenses.
I think he may have already made the mistake, which was, I think somewhere in the 2011 timeframe, they figured out this program was messed up. Republicans have been nipping at this all along, and basically their approach was, well, we'll cut it off we'll just end the program. They should have just dug in themselves and not waited for everybody else to find the problems. They should have outed the problems themselves.
Well, let's shift gears there a little bit. Chris, we'll go back to you and your watchdog story with Tim Novak this week. Can you tell us a little bit about what's happening with elite enrollment high schools in the city and why the populations are changing?
Sure. Tim Foy had a bunch of data from the Chicago Public Schools that we began to crunch and analyze and plug into different spreadsheets. And at the end of the day, we walked away with a story that basically says at the top 4 selective enrollment schools, those schools are getting whiter. And it is not a shock in light of a federal court consent decree that ended in 2010. Are the numbers off the charts? Absolutely not. The schools are about, in the range of 40 to 42% white at the top 4 schools, as opposed to before when they were under 35, which is what the consent decree had. That said, there have been more selective enrollment high schools added in African American neighborhoods. There are selective enrollment high schools that are completely African American. So it's just kind of a dynamic of the better schools are drawing the white kids.
But there are 10 selective enrollment schools in Chicago, and they're all good options. And during this time period, they opened 2, one on the west side and one on the south side, that draw almost exclusively black kids. And so, if you're a parent and you're choosing, you live in South Shore, you're going to send your kid to South Shore International College Prep, or you're going to send them to Northside College Prep, which is a ridiculous, distance for a 14-year-old to travel.
So when you look at this new Obama Select Enrollment High School, who is that going to serve? Is that going to help with some of the need for black students, or?
It's going to be located near Peyton, which has the highest percentage of white students. So, the odds are it's probably going to mirror Peyton. But it's a problem. You don't want to make these schools inaccessible to black students, and that's the choice of where to locate the school has a huge role to play in that.
One thing that I think was very interesting in crunching the numbers was seeing how the CPS system has evolved over time for admissions into these schools, and how no matter which way you slice it, it is a very complicated, difficult, gun-trenching proposition for a parent, whether your kid is white, black, or purple. When you look at this tier system, we started running median incomes out of these tiers, and conceivably you can have a kid living in Lincoln Park, a white kid living in Lincoln Park, or a black kid for that matter, who has a better chance of getting in than a kid who's living in Hegwish or at 95th and Halstead. And while the differences are minuscule, when it comes down to that, could affect one kid. And the tier systems, based on my read of it and not being an expert, is that median income needs to factor into that a little more. Right now it seems like everything is weighted equally, and there's so many factors that it results in some inequities there.
They tried to do, basically, when they couldn't use race anymore, they tried to use sort of a proxy for race, and a lot of, it's based on socioeconomic factors, single family homes, limited English, income. But I think you make a good point. There's 6 factors, and maybe they're all weighted the same. So maybe in the census tract, median income could be weighted more, because that's such a powerful variable if you're really trying to get diversity in these schools.
Right. Okay, well, before we run out of time, let's go to our quote of the week. And Mark Brown, I hear you got a good one.
Well, my quote of the week is, "We Googled him," which is a Pakistan version of the FBI explaining how they managed to figure out that Amir Ahmad, who was our former city controller and trying to sneak into Pakistan, wasn't who he said he was with his Mexican passport. So we Googled him.
Fake Mexican passport.
Fake Mexican passport.
All right, Kate.
So mine is off this horrendous shooting this week of a 14-year-old girl, allegedly by another 14-year-old girl. And Superintendent Gary McCarthy said, what would have been probably a fist fight between 2 14-year-old girls because of an argument over a boy turned into a murder. That's insanity. I think we can all agree. Yeah. It's a pretty sad statement.
I'm going to change the mood, of course, because Kate is deep thinking and focusing on
sober and
serious topics. I'm going to go the opposite route. My quote of the week is from Alderman Pat O'Connor, who said, in response to criticism about the city allowing people to buy beer and wine and other forms of liquor in grocery stores finally starting at 8 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday, rather than the usual 11 a.m., He said, quote, "A bad business that's a bad business at 8 o'clock on a Sunday is probably a bad business at 11 o'clock or 12 o'clock on a Sunday." And I must add personal bias here. If I had a nickel for every time I have been shut out of buying a bottle of wine at Whole Foods at 10:30 or maybe 9 o'clock, I'd be a little bit richer.
And I will give Governor Quinn the last word since we spent so much time on him. Brooke Anderson responding to our report that there was a federal inquiry into the anti-violence program. She says, quote, "If there is an inquiry, we fully support it. We have zero tolerance for any mismanagement at any state agency." Of course, Rounders people jumped on that immediately and said, wait, isn't that the same thing Rod Blagojevich said back in the day? With that, thank you very much for joining us on Off Message, and we will see you next week.